Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm making this recording about the arrest of an important Muslim scholar in Egypt named Ahmed Subair. At dawn yesterday, the security forces arrested Ahmed Subair from his home, led him to an undetermined location. They refused to inform his wife why they were arresting him or what the charges are, and refused to tell her where he was going to be held or for how long he's going to be held, which is typical of the way the Egyptian security forces do things, especially when they arrest people at dawn. All the available information is that Ahmed Subair was arrested because of a tweet. First, who is Ahmed Subair? Ahmed Subair is someone that I've spoken about in the past because he was arrested in the past. He is, in my opinion, a very important Muslim scholar, a young man. He has mastered Hebrew and Aramaic, and he focuses on comparative religions. All of his work is on studying manuscripts of the Old Testament and the New Testament, manuscripts and versions and history and theologies of the Old Testament and New Testament. And his primary field of work are these YouTube educational lectures or in different formats, but basically using modern media with a clear focus in countering the resurgence of evangelical efforts and the explosion of Christian evangelism in Muslim countries, especially Egypt, but all over the Muslim world. Unfortunately, most of his videotapes are in Arabic and are not translated. Some of his videotapes are translated or subtitled. And I know that at least the ones that are subtitled are influential in places like Indonesia and Malaysia and so on. But in the Arabic-speaking world, he has had a considerable amount of influence in responding to the claims of Christian missionaries and the attacks of Christian missionaries and the claims of Christian missionaries about the superiority of Christianity to Islam. And what I like about him is that he doesn't have a dogmatic or a rhetorical style. He's very methodical, very careful, very calm. From a scholarly perspective, his information is very reliable and very well vetted out. And clearly, if Ahmed Subair was born in a non-authoritarian state, if he was born Christian, or if he was born Jewish, if he was born a Christian theologian or a Jewish theologian, he would have become very prominent. his intellectual abilities say clearly that he would have become a very prominent and famous human being. He would have been celebrated by his own people. But because he had the misfortune of being born Muslim, um, very few, I mean, he has about 1 million followers on YouTube. But he's persecuted in his own country by his country. He can't leave Egypt. He's not allowed to exit Egypt. If he can't go to Saudi Arabia, he can't go to the Emirat, he can't travel anywhere, he can't get, even if he gets a job offer or he gets an invitation to lecture anywhere around the world, including the United States, the Egyptian government will not allow him to leave. So why was he arrested? Well, Ahmed Subair was arrested last February. He was held for about 50 days. He refused to talk in public about what happened to him when he was arrested. But I found out through my own channels that he was humiliated, insulted, threatened, beaten, and basically because he crossed the Coptic Church. That the Coptic Church in Egypt was upset about some of his videos where he pointed to insults the Coptic Church had directed at Islam and embarrassed the Coptic Church, and the Coptic Church called in favors with the Sisi government. And he was instructed to not touch the Coptic Church, and particularly certain people within the Coptic Church, people who are close to Sisi, the president of Egypt. Well, this time it's even more absurd and more ridiculous. This time the reason he's been arrested is because he wrote on Twitter, he tweeted that he supports boycotting French products because France has not only insulted the Prophet, and also not only refused to apologize, but that since then the Macron government has escalated its racism and its persecution of Muslims. And he's right. Just a few weeks ago, French police detained 4 Muslim children, all of them about 9, 10, and 11 years old, and they detained them for 48 hours without informing their parents, and under the charge or under suspicion that they expressed views supportive of terrorism. 10-year-olds. Even more recently, another 4 Muslim children, this time around 14 and 15 years old, have been officially arrested and charged because in the murder of the French teacher who was killed over the cartoons, the pornographic cartoons insulting the Prophet, they were arrested not as co-conspirators with the person who actually committed the crime, but because they expressed views, again, not supportive of the murder, but critical of what the teacher did. And according to new French policies and new French prosecutorial policies especially, if you criticize the teaching of the pornographic images of the Prophet in French public schools, that makes you a terrorism sympathizer. Now, add to this, because the French respect freedom of speech, The French have arrested and placed in deportation proceedings tons of Muslims being suspected of religiosity. They pick them off the street and they cancel their visas simply because they're religious. They've arrested and placed in deportation proceeding tons of Muslim women who wear hijab. They've closed tons of Muslim charitable institutions and mosques. They fired or forced Islamic institutions to fire tons of imams that are seen as not sufficiently loyal to France. And by that, now it's very clear, these are imams who have been not supportive of Saudi Arabia, not supportive of the Emirat. Some of them have been supportive of Turkey, especially in the recent war with Azerbaijan. Some of them have been imams that have been critical of colonial history, especially French colonial history, but colonial history. Some of them are imams that have been supportive of critical race theory. Because amazingly now, the French are saying, like the Trump administration, that critical race theory is evil. So here is the people that respect freedom of speech. If you're Muslim, you're Muslim. In a mosque or in a khutbah or an Islamic school, and you talk about critical race theory, you're not French and you're a separatist and you should be deported. It's reached levels of absurdity that are unparalleled. And of course, the rest of the world are silent because the rest of the world are only interested when Muslims are the ones that are supposed to be the ones who cannot comprehend free speech. Although, to be fair, the Washington Post and the New York Times have both condemned the new French policies. Or criticized, at least, not condemned, but criticized. They had good art, especially the New York Times, had a good article on criticizing this turn to dictatorship and authoritarianism and anti-Islamism and Islamophobia on part of the French government. So Ahmed Subair tweeted saying, in light of all of this, I support the boycotting of French products. And he was promptly arrested. Now, mind you, if you've been in this field as long as I have, and you've seen as much as I've seen, you know what happens to people who have anything to do with Islam and are arrested by Egyptian security forces. Even if they're not tortured, just the conditions in which they're held, and especially today now, because right now they pack them like sardines. One, they pack them like sardines in transportation cars as they move them from one detention area to another. Second, they pack them like sardines in little cells that are way overcrowded. They're not allowed visitors, they're not allowed medicine, they're not allowed food, they're not allowed sanitation. And under the corona circumstances, COVID circumstances, for many, many, many political detainees, it's a death sentence. And many Egyptians have died because of COVID under these circumstances. Now, quickly, I have a couple of other points. Again, I emphasize, if Ahmed Subair was in any other, if this was a Jewish scholar, this was it's Jewish intellect or a Christian intellect or an atheist or a secular intellect, this man would have been celebrated, and I wouldn't put it far that he would have been ended up a professor at Harvard Divinity School, or ended up teaching at Princeton religion department, teaching about Christianity and the history of Christianity. But because he's Muslim, this is his fate. Second point. This again underscores that these governments, in an entirely predictable way, under the guise of fighting political Islam, are now waging a war against Islam itself. And all of you out there that buy this nonsense, that Saudi Arabia is fighting political Islam, or the Emirates is fighting political Islam, or that Egypt is fighting political Islam, not Islam, you're deluded. Leave alone supporters of oppression and injustice. Ahmed Subair has never spoken about the Egyptian government, have never said one critical word about Sisi, or Saudi Arabia, or the Emirates, and doesn't even speak about Israel, or the Palestinians. He lives in a world that existed thousands of years ago. Talks about manuscripts, Old Testament manuscripts, New Testament manuscripts, New Testament scholars, all the different scribes of the New Testaments, all the different manuscripts of the New Testaments are out there, the little technical, philological differences in Hebrew, etc., etc., etc. But if you now, by implication, do things that are supportive of Islam, even stand up to missionary work and Christian proselytizing and evangelism, you have become an enemy of the state. Because the state is interested in only one thing, and that is catering to Western interests. So if France wants its missionaries to have a free hand in your country, you serve France. If the Trump administration wants American missionaries to have a free hand in Egypt, as they did, because the Trump administration wanted Protestantism to spread in countries like Egypt and the Emirates, that becomes your policy. Third, and this is specifically to American Muslims, as a Muslim, I can no longer even remain with the hint of neutrality about Muslims who take immoral stands. Let us be very clear. All Egyptians that fail to condemn Sisi, all Egyptians that support Sisi or that refuse to condemn Sisi are morally bankrupt and corrupt. And I mean that not figuratively, I mean that literally. Meaning, all such Egyptians have a vested interest in upholding and supporting corruption and oppression. All those Egyptians care more about their homes in Egypt, care about the jobs of their family in Egypt, care about their summer homes in Egypt, care about their retirement homes in Egypt,
care about their contacts with the police and the army in Egypt than about Islam or justice or anything. All same thing with all Saudis who support Mohammed bin Salman. Any Muslim that continues to support Mohammed bin Salman is corrupt, fasiq, fasid. Same thing with all Muslims who support Mohammed bin Zayed. Fasid, fasid. Every Muslim institution in the United States that fails to condemn injustice for what it is an institution that is part and parcel of fisq and fasad, of corruption and immorality. I live in Los Angeles, and as I sit here thinking of what Ahmed Subair is going through and what his family is going through, and I think of the fact that if Ahmed Subair was the one who managed to leave Egypt and come to the United States decades ago, that he would be a prominent professor. I would be dealing with him as a colleague today because I know my intellectual abilities and I know that I have nothing superior to him. He would be as distinguished, if not more distinguished than I am. And I look at the Muslim communities around me, and I remember the fact that as a Muslim who came from Egypt, that I am now banned from the Islamic Center of Southern California because I criticized Sisi's regime. All of you that continue to go to places like the Islamic Center of Southern California, you are part of fisq and fasad. No ifs, ands, or ors about it. If you do not want to be placed with the fasaqa and fasada in the hereafter, the least you can do is be clear in your heart about what's wrong and what's right. But even that is probably not enough. Because if you can do something like vote with your donations, vote with your presence or your absence, vote with just an email that you could write, vote with where you attend Jummah or not attend Jummah, where you pray Eid or not pray Eid. You will be held to account. Beyond that, at this point, every Muslim is under an obligation to know who their representative is and to write the representative and get into the habit of making demands upon your representatives. Every Muslim should write their representative and say, we American taxpayers, we fund and support Sisi's fascist criminal government. I demand, as someone who elected you into office, that you demand that the Egyptian government promptly free Ahmed Subair, because Ahmed Subair's sole crime is free speech. And you're supposed to be all about free speech. It's amazing. A Muslim is arrested for a crime of free speech. Ahmed Subair has no other possible crime. And when it comes to that type of speech, the entire civilized world is not interested. Suddenly, we're not talking about Charles Hebdo. We're not talking about great Western values. We're not talking about Judeo-Christian values. We're not talking about human rights. We're not talking. No one cares. But the world can remain so hypocritical because of our moral corruption. It is our moral corruption that enables the world to continue being so hypocritical when it comes to Muslims. If we were not so morally corrupt, the world would not be so hypocritical when it comes to Muslims. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.